Welcome to this week's edition of Focus on Connecticut. I'm Tom Appleby. We continue our post-legislative session discussions with two area lawmakers, both of them from the state Senate. Let me introduce them to you. They are frequent guests here on Focus on Connecticut. Tony Boucher is a Republican with the 26th District, and that is Bethel, New Canaan, Reading, Ridgefield, Weston, Westport, Wilton. I think I need a drink of coffee after that. And State Senate Assistant President Pro Tem Bob Duff is a Democrat, 25th District, Norwalk and Darien. I thank you both for coming back.
Thanks for having us.
And if you watch this program frequently, whenever Tony Boucher comes on, she's wearing red.
Absolutely.
Is this a message? Do you have an announcement you wish to make here?
Well, you know, I thought I'd mix it up just for a change, but you're right. Red is my favorite color on many levels.
So there's no other significance,
No.
just a little change. Today is the 6-month anniversary of the Newtown shootings. As a matter of fact, we're taping this on Friday, and immediately after this program, there is going to be the start of the ceremonies and a moment of silence. And you were actively involved, I know, in one of the committees. You both spent virtually half the legislative session dealing with legislation to deal with this kind of problem. Could Newtown, now that you've done all of this, could Newtown happen again?
Yes, it could. Because this event was a black swan event. It is not something you can predict, and all of the experts told us that. However, there was a great deal of pressure, no question, to respond in some way. My area of concentration was on the schools, school security and safety. What can we do to improve the infrastructure and the processes and procedures that are there? And that was my main focus. As you know, my concern has been about education in the school community for all of my legislative time.
So we spent a lot of legislative time on this. She's saying it's a black swan, but black swans do occur in nature. Yeah. This could happen again.
Well, I certainly hope that it never happens again. I'm sure that's the wish and desire of anybody who has a heart. And we passed some very strong legislation, the strongest in the nation, and could we guarantee that it'll never happen again? Of course not. We can't do that. But I think we took some great strides. And I will say that I think we sent a very strong message, not only to the residents of the state of Connecticut, but also really the residents of the country, in that Democrats and Republicans came together, really not as Democrats or Republicans, but as members of the state, as citizens of the state, and sent a strong message about working together and passing legislation where I may not have agreed with everything, Tony may not have agreed with everything, but we said, you know what, we have to put this forward and to really send that strong message. And I hope that in the end, some of the mental health stuff that we did was very, very strong. We may not see that for years, kind of the repercussions of that legislation, the gun safety, and also the school security. I think it was very comprehensive, and we should be very proud about what we did.
Even with that being said, however, I think that there was some great deal of disappointment in, I think, mainly the other two committees, both the gun legislation and the mental health legislation. For me, the crux of this entire issue was on mental health. I don't think we went far enough, and to concentrate on that very specific area. Even today, there were calls by the first select woman, the Republican first select woman of Newtown, in saying that we need to know more about the motivations, the problems that this individual had that would elicit this behavior, because only then can we really prevent it in the future. To concentrate just on guns isn't really, I think, the wise thing to do. And that piece of legislation, which some feel was an overreach, might even be adjudicated by the courts. That's the beauty of our system. We have a executive branch, legislative, and judicial branch, and the judicial branch will decide if that was an overreach and it's constitutional, in fact. So no matter how many laws you put on the books with regards to guns and weapons, you know that they will be illegally purchased no matter what we say. But the mental health issues are critical. There was the closing down of a mental health facility in Newtown. The individuals were dispersed in our communities. We have shown that we don't often provide that oversight and treatment necessary when we do that to really follow up on some of the most severe cases. And how do we do that within our school system and within our communities is, I think, one of the big issues that's yet to be resolved.
Of course, part of the problem here is we don't know what Adam Lanza's problems were. There has been no report.
Right, and that's the thing, is that I certainly hope the courts don't strike down the gun legislation we did. I think it was supported by many in our community, and do believe that is an important component of what we did. The second piece on the mental health, people who know about it far better than I do, from the industry to advocates, have said that the mental health piece that we did in the bill will be far-reaching, and the implications won't be felt for a very long time from a standpoint of we have really pushed the envelope on a lot of this from a standpoint of what is now covered, what is mandated to be covered by insurance companies, how we can be proactive about that much better than we had been in the past. So I think that we have to wait and see. We can't throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, we just didn't go far enough. I think it's really important for us to, continue to monitor it, but also to say, we did do some things that really were far-reaching, much more far-reaching than we would ever have done had this awful incident not happened.
One of the interesting parts of this session was that, as you said, it was overshadowed and dominated by the issue in Sandy Hook. It also ended the session with that issue in the legislation where many parents came to the Capitol literally sleeping on our sofas long hours into the wee hours of the morning, in fact, regarding the freedom of information of whether or not photographs of their children would be open to the public and to the press and to the media.
Post-shooting photographs.
Correct. And that was highly debatable, and also I think one of the more difficult votes cast as well, because there's a fine line between complete freedom of the press, the necessity to have that so that a free society can continue, because imagine in situations in other countries where there's devastation and innocent children and women are massacred, and that is not allowed to be brought to the public, so they don't realize that something evil is occurring in their country, in their leadership. Whereas we also are concerned about how those pictures of those children could be exploited.
I'd like to continue with discussion and get you a chance to weigh into it. Just take a brief break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Focus on Connecticut. We're talking about Sandy Hook and a very controversial piece of legislation, because you didn't just say these photographs of these 20 children and these 6 adults will not be released. You said, you the lawmakers in this legislation, that's it. They won't be released. So then how do we find out? You mentioned overseas. It happens here too. Mm-hmm. How do we find out when there's a cover-up if we have no access to that kind of information?
Yeah, well, that definitely is a fine line. And we had many discussions in our caucus room, and I'm sure Tony did in her caucus room, about that line to cross. And
in fact, only 2 senators, including one from our area, Musto, voted against this.
Right, right. And it wasn't out of any disrespect for the families or the parents. It really was trying to decide where that line exists. But one of the things we heard is really the gruesome things that the parents and the families of Newtown have to deal with on a day in and day out basis. I mean, they have people who are really sickos calling them on the phone every day, or sending them letters about their children are really alive. Or,
yes, that's the conspiracy
all
theory.
These kinds
because one of the arguments is, if you release these photos, that puts the theory to rest.
Right. But on the other hand, as a parent, can any parent imagine seeing their child on the front page of the newspaper with bullet holes somewhere on them? I mean, it just makes my stomach turn. Just
And some of them
even
unrecognizable.
verbalizing that. So it's just, that's where I think, there was part of this was, you have to think sometimes as a legislator without passion or prejudice. But on the other hand, emotion does kind of take over. And I think for many of us, we thought, giving the parents a little bit of peace of mind, knowing that. And frankly, as Tony said, they sat behind us that night that we passed that bill. And you look at the parents and you just see really, after 6 months or so, I mean, the healing hasn't even begun yet. No. And I don't know that it ever will. And there's really nothing that any of us can say.
That's right.
So if there's just some small things we can do to help them in a way that may make their lives a little bit better, I think that we're willing to do that.
That being said, though, there is a real concern about protecting the openness of our press, because honestly that is the underpinning of our free society, and we have to be so cautious in that area. As you said, the potential for cover-up or for something very bad to happen. And this legislation, actually, the reason that it was more broad, as you said, for any victims of a homicide is because there were some very valid cases made by many in the inner city that this happens to their family on a regular basis.
Legislation for 20 white children and not for... Yes.
Exactly. It isn't equitable. It's not fair. That being said, the parents have the rights to those photographs. However, the transcripts, the 911 tapes, all of that is open. That has not been protected. All of that will continue to be open and available for sure. Additionally, you have to remember that this is legislation that is only for a certain time period. It actually is now going to be going into a research phase with members of the media, members of law enforcement, and victims' rights advocates to see what is the proper step to be put in place. It does exist. That protection exists on a federal level. For federal cases, this happens to be a state issue, and that's why the potential, and there were rumors that Michael Moore was going to obtain those photographs and go on a crusade to ban guns, to be an anti-gun advocate using those horrific photographs.
Actually, it's been said that at least one, if not more, of the parents was ready to release
exactly,
the photo.
exactly.
Parents from Newtown.
Well, but
they want you to see what happened to
exactly,
my child.
And they still have the ownership of those photographs. And I would presume that they could release them if they so choose. But not everyone is capable of doing that. In fact, some of those photographs are unrecognizable. It's just a devastating thing. And again, that balancing act, that fine line, as Senator Duff just mentioned, is a very difficult one to write. And that's why it's for until 2014. And after that, the issue will be revisited again with the proper time to really investigate what's the proper balance.
Talk about proper balance. You were talking about the fact that this was a bipartisan effort for this part of the session, and then things changed. When we come back, let's talk about the budget and what happened to bipartisanship. Back in just a moment. Welcome back to Focus on Connecticut. I'm Tom Appleby. I want to reintroduce my guests to you. They are State Senator Bob Duff from the 25th District and State Senator Tony Boucher from the 26th District. So, I don't want to overstate this, but there was a good feeling in the Capitol over this horrible issue. I mean, people were talking to each other. That line down the middle was crossed. And then once Newtown was put behind you, there is a claim, and I'm sure we'll hear it from Tony Boucher, that the Democrats just took over. That they weren't welcome at the table anymore. Why did that happen?
Well, that may have been just for the budget. Let me just preface this by saying that about 90% of the legislation...
It means a lot to the people
of course it does, but 90% of the legislation that we do, including the legislation I chair, the legislation that Tony Boucher is involved in, is all bipartisan, almost unanimous. So I just want to put that to the side so people don't think that we're Washington and we can't get anything done in a bipartisan way. But yes, the budget is partisan, and it generally is. There's times where either party will stake out their claims on what they think is important, and but I feel good the fact that we have a budget that is done for 2 years. We got out on time. We got done with everything during the regular session, and the fact of the matter is that towns were held harmless. Some towns like Norwalk received increases. We received about $1.7 million additionally in school funding. So I feel very good about that. We protected investments like the Maritime Aquarium and Stepping Stones and other places, and we're supporting various other types of investments that are important to not only Norwalk but for Fairfield County. So I understand that my good friends on the other side of the aisle are going to have some concerns of the budget, but frankly, they were certainly willing and able to put forth their own plan that never materialized. So. That's up to them to do that and be part of the conversation.
In effect, they're saying you just want to sit back and take pot shots. You didn't put down a budget for them to look at.
Tom, the door was closed shut on this. A budget is a policy statement for the leadership to decide which road they want to take the state in, and the road that was taken was decidedly negative. We were the only state in the union with a negative GDP. We shrank All of the other states increased. Our unemployment is still at 8%. Our neighboring states are at 6.8%. When you have a negative GDP growth, that shows that your policies have definitely failed. And in the process of that, there were a lot of broken promises of no new taxes. In fact, we have an 8% gas tax increase on July 1. We have a 10% surcharge on corporations. We have an increase in our energy tax and so forth. All the while, there's going to be $750 million in increased borrowing and $315 million in increased taxes. This budget spends nearly 10% more in the next 2 years. What, to support a 15% over 3 years in wage increases when it could have been different? And speak about putting forth an alternative plan
for the state workers.
For the state workers, exactly. This is unsustainable when revenues come in short, because as we tax more, and as can see by our loss of jobs, even with all of the incentives being proposed by the administration, we lose double the number of jobs on the other end of that. And there is no question, no one can deny that we have jobs and people leaving the state as a result of the high tax burden. How do you show that? We're the latest tax-free state in the country. May 13th is when our citizens stop paying for the cost of their government and start earning for themselves and their families. That is 8 days later than even last year. 8 days later, the worst in the country. We have to stop this and have new thinking at the county.
Well, that is because of our federal tax burden, not our state tax burden.
Whether you call these new taxes or taxes that didn't retire or whatever, 2 years ago, the governor told us we're raising the state income tax, and that's going to be it. It's going to solve all our problems.
Right. Well, look, if it's that bad, then there's no better case to put an alternative budget on the table than for all those reasons that Senator Boucher just mentioned. So I'm surprised that there wasn't one. I will say that as an Appropriations Committee member and one who chairs 3 subcommittees, I had the Republicans in the room the entire time, and they had all the information I did, able to make decisions, and could have put forth an alternative proposal. And I will say that, is any budget perfect? Absolutely not. We are making tough decisions. We still have an economy that is struggling. We still have people who have a lot of need out there. We've made important decisions on investments, and also important decisions on fully funding our pension obligations, which had not been done under the previous administration. So those things, a lot of those things cost money, and you can't have your cake and eat it too. So you can't say to the towns and cities, we're going to hold you harmless, and then on the other hand make major cuts to the budget, because of the fact that that's some of the biggest expenditures that we have.
One of the fears at the beginning of the session was that you were going to put some pressure on the cities by eliminating the car tax. When we come back, let's talk about what the alternative is going to be, and maybe that is a possibility, because it is going to be considered. One more break. Back in a moment. Welcome back. Just a few minutes left. Tony Boucher wants to say a few more things about the budget. I do want to talk about this, what's going to happen to cities and towns. The big concern there was, all right, you get rid of the car tax, now the municipalities are going to have to tax their residents to make up the difference.
Well, that didn't fly, apparently, because, again, the raise in property taxes was going to be severe on all of our cities and small towns, all of them combined. There is a Democratic proposal to ultimately remove it in the further out years, but that's only to create a system of a statewide property tax. It's just taking from one hand and giving it to the other. It's not appropriate. Just as part of this budget that was enacted, where we had proposed an alternative, one of the major components was an earned income tax credit that emulates the national one at the cost of $110 million. This is to reappropriate taxes from those that pay taxes to those that do not. Can we afford that in a time when we're in severe deficit? I don't think so. There were a lot of things put in place, added to, that we can't afford right now. That's the bottom line. We can't afford to add more burdens, both in higher minimum tax or minimum wage increases that are now the highest in the country. We can't afford to have the highest gas tax even further in the country, while at the same time, in order to supposedly balance this budget, which I would maintain is not balanced because they took a whole bunch of expenditures offline, so it wasn't in the spending cap, but they also raid the transportation fund of $100 million. They raid the energy fund, they raid the tobacco fund, they raid the probate court fund, and that.
In other words, she's saying gimmicks.
She doesn't like
You're doing the
Come
same
on.
thing
Again.
that you as Democrats claimed the Republicans were doing when they were in the top.
While shutting the door to a bipartisan give and take, which we do have proposals on the table for sure that could be just getting rid of the earned income tax credit right there would bring us back $100 million in the green.
Just on the earned income tax credit, that was an idea put forth by President Ford back in the 70s, and actually rewards work over welfare, and it helps the working poor continue and to incent work. So the earned income tax credit, in my opinion, is something that is very valuable in the state, and something I had fought for along with Senator Looney and others in the state for a long time, and I'm proud that Governor Malloy put that in his budget proposal too. We did scale it back this year because of making additional cuts from 30% to 25%, but that is part of that. But again, if it's as bad as Senator Boucher claims, and we're good friends, and but we can agree to disagree on the budget.
Maybe you'll wear a red tie.
Right. Then there should have been an alternative budget proposal instead of saying, look, we were shut out of the door. Well, you have your own door and you have your own paper, so make up your own proposal.
Well, the bottom line is,
Senator Boucher, it's for herself, but to be fair, in years past, whether you're in or out, the other party has always proposed a budget, and it has sat there gathering
it has.
dust.
It's been dismissed out of hand, and when you have one party controlling the executive branch and both the
Didn't
legislature.
this happen under Governor Rell? Democrats put forth a proposal and...
No, actually, under Governor Rell, she had a supermajority Democrat controlling the House and the Senate. Remember,
Only
the
for 2
president
years.
and the governor proposes a budget. The legislature decides or proposes one of their own. And quite frankly, there's been a supermajority House and Senate or majority party for the last 34 out of the last 40 years. And as such, it becomes their template. And I know the budgets she originally proposed and the ones she couldn't get through, the House or the Senate. So she basically said, well, we're not going anywhere. I'm not signing your budget, but it's the budget that the majority party proposed. It's really their template for the state. And right now, the state has changed dramatically. It's not a state I recognize growing up in, and we need to change direction and a new way of thinking.
Well, her last, unfortunately, her last proposal, her last budget was $2.5 billion out of balance, and that's kind of how she left it that way. Love Governor Rell, nice lady.
We're going to have to leave it this way, too. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. I'm afraid that it's always, blame the past, but right now, front and center, this is a new administration that's in the third and fourth year.
We've run out of time. Thank you for joining us as well. Stay tuned. The news continues. We really got down there to 1 second.